That answer. The member for McMahon.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Treasurer. I refer to the Treasurer's statements yesterday in question time about the importance of reducing government spending. Is government spending this financial year expected to be higher or lower than the level of spending forecast for the same year at the time of the last election?
The Treasurer has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for the question. The expenditure as a percentage of GDP in this year's budget is forecast to be at 25.9%, which is higher than at the time of the last election. It is, Mr Speaker. It is.
Members on my left will cease. The Treasurer resume his seat. Treasurer resume his seat. The member for Grayndler will cease interjecting. The Treasurer is no more than about 20 seconds into his answer. The member for McMahon's asked a question. Members on my left will cease interjecting. There's a wall of noise. The Treasurer is entitled to answer the question. Treasurer.
But unlike those opposite, Mr Speaker, we have a plan to control expenditure over the budget and forward estimates, and I can report to the House that this year it's estimated to be 25.9%. Next year it will fall to 25.5%. The year after that, 25.3%, Mr Speaker. So we have a plan to control expenditure over the budgets and forward estimates. Now, those opposite, Mr Speaker, Mr Speaker, have $57 billion of outstanding commitments and calls on the government purse to restore expenditure that this government has been able to get under control. And so, Mr Speaker, I find it somewhat passing strange that those opposite are raising the issue of expenditure in this place when they left this country in the mess that they did with their fiscal recklessness, Mr Speaker. Now, at the last election, Mr Speaker, just before that election, there was a PFO. You'll remember it. And it contained many assumptions, Mr Speaker. It contained many assumptions, and one of those assumptions, Mr Speaker, was that some thousands of people would continue to arrive in Australia by boat, but yet, Mr Speaker, they didn't account for $1.2 billion worth of expenditure that was necessary to ensure that we could deal with
members
the
on my left
that those opposite left behind.
The member for
In addition to that,
will
Mr Speaker, it also assumed there'd be a carbon tax. It also assumed there'd be a mining tax, and more than that, they assumed the mining tax would actually raise revenue, Mr Speaker. And so when we look at the record of those opposite, Mr Speaker, what we know is, on this side is we're a government that wants to help people work, save and invest. On that side, what they want is they want to spend, and then they want to tax, and they want to borrow.
Member for Bass.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and my question is also to the Treasurer. Will the Treasurer advise the House how a more agile and innovative economy can support Australia's commercial arrangements with growing economies in our region? Treasurer, how does national competition reform further strengthen our economy?
Treasurer has the call.
And I thank the member for Bass for his question, because he knows, as the Prime Minister has already said, that this is an exciting time to be an Australian because of the opportunities that we have before us. And we know, as a country, there are uncertainties and volatilities that are out there, but we have a confidence, as the Australian people and Australian business are expressing that confidence, as the Prime Minister has said, in the opportunities that are before us. And Australians are backing themselves, as the government is backing Australians, to be able to make the transitions that are necessary for us to get from where we are today to the prosperity that is in front of us. But there are other things we have to do, Mr Speaker. We need to ensure that we have strong fundamentals in our economy which is directing us towards flexibility and agility. Now, that of course means we need a tax system, Mr Speaker, that can support Australians to do the things that they want to do in the economy. But equally, Mr Speaker, we need a competition policy that can help us grow and prosper. And not just that, Mr Speaker, that a competition policy that is going to give Australians right across the board, from infants all the way through those age, the sort of choices that they want to be on offer here in our economy, Mr Speaker. And that's why on Friday of this week the Harper Review will be on the agenda for the State Treasurer's meeting, because what they also want to do in the states and territories, Mr Speaker, is they want to engage in this process of growing our economy. Those opposite don't want to engage. They don't want to engage with the task of budget repair. They don't want to engage with the task of economic reform. What they simply want to do is try and scare Australians out of prosperity. So what we want to do, Mr Speaker, is we want to get the focus on the Harper Review, on the big-ticket reforms that can be achieved at a state and territory level as well as at a Commonwealth level. And the most exciting of them, Mr Speaker, is in the area of health and social services. Now, we know already that this is a $100 billion sector in the Australian economy. It employs more than 1.4 million Australians, Mr Speaker. That's up 500,000 in the last 10 years alone. And the opportunities for the growth in human and social services in this country and through the free trade agreements that have been achieved by the Minister for Trade will ensure that this will be a growth engine for our economy. So on this side of the House, we want to ensure that these opportunities are explored in concert with the states. The states want to see their economies grow. The Commonwealth Government wants to see the national economy grow, but that means we need to work together to work through the reforms, whether it's in health and social services, which will give Australians more choice for the services that they want to see and they want to support, whether it's in the area of land use planning and zoning and those sorts of issues, which the Minister for Cities knows all about, which he knows if you can unlock the productivity of cities, you can grow your economy at a much greater rate. Because at the end of the day, Mr Speaker, we want to see this economy grow because that's the way you bring the budget back into balance, and that's the way you secure the jobs of the future.
Member for McMahon.
Thanks very much, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Treasurer. Yesterday, the Prime Minister said he would consider Labor's plan to make superannuation fair and sustainable. On the 17th of June, the Treasurer said, and I quote, "There are other taxation arrangements that apply to superannuation and we are not going to increase those taxes. We will not tax your super." Does the Treasurer stand by his statement?
Treasurer has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The superannuation policies that we have had in place now for more than 20 years, which were introduced originally by the former member for Blaxland, have been an important part of ensuring that Australians can plan for their future and ensure that they can support themselves in their retirement. Now, the reason we have tax incentives for superannuation, Mr Speaker, is because we want Australians, when they reach retirement age, to be able to not be dependent on welfare for the pension. That's what we want them to aspire to, and we hope that is something that a vast majority of Australians will be able to achieve. And so it's important that we understand the purpose of superannuation and why the tax incentive is important. It is also important, Mr Speaker, that if you're going to put in place tax incentives for superannuation, and we're encouraging Australians to invest in their superannuation, then they have to have some certainty about what's going to happen in 20 or 30 years' time when they're in the retirement phase. Now, those opposite will know that the Prime Minister has made it very clear that the government will be looking at issues in relation to superannuation. But what the Australian people can be confident about is the Coalition's record when it comes to superannuation. We know that it's their money, Mr Speaker. We know that it has a purpose, and we need to know, and we do know, that there needs to be stability in the superannuation system. Now, what the Shadow Treasurer is putting forward is to increase the uncertainty around superannuation investments by focusing his greedy tax initiatives on the retirement phase, Mr Speaker. Now, those on this side have a very good record when it comes to understanding that when you've saved to your future, we don't come and raid it. Those opposite have a very different record.
The member for Fairfax has the call.
A question to the Prime Minister. No government is so evil that it cannot see the